Hello everybody, and welcome back to another video. In today's video, we'll be taking a look at the 2025 gubernatorial elections. Seeing as it is now the end of the month of April, I thought, hey, now is a good time to start looking at these races. We have less than 6 months to go until we'll have statewide elections in the states of Virginia, or in the Commonwealth of Virginia and the state of New Jersey. So we're going to begin our forecast for these states. These two governors' races are going to be probably I think that and the Wisconsin election from earlier this month are going to be the two biggest election nights of the year. So without further ado, let's get started. We're going to begin in the state of New Jersey, which I've talked about a little bit on this channel for a few videos the past few months, but let's just start by having a refresher. We do not yet know who the Democratic nominee is going to be, nor who the Republican nominee is going to be, but we do have somewhat of a good idea. Right now, if we take a look at the Democratic primary, it's looking more and more likely that the nominee is going to be Mikey Sherrill. Steve Sweeney, who's the former president of the Senate, did quite well in South Jersey, but the larger Democratic base is in North Jersey, whereas you can see Sherrill does quite well. She wins the vast majority of the county endorsements, and just in general, just to kind of show like the limited, I think we have very, very limited information with this primary in general, but I would say in terms of name recognition and in terms of just overall polling, she has a very clear advantage. You also can kind of see this in the amount of money that's been raised. Stephen Fulop has raised a good amount, as does Josh Gottheimer, but she's still I'd say well ahead of Spiller and Baraka. Steve Sweeney, not surprising, he's raised a lot of money. He is very well connected in the state's politics, but I think the most compelling argument for Sherrill is that she's led in every poll, and this primary is, I think, likely to go her way, just given the fact that, as we can see where the support comes from, Steve Sweeney might do quite well in South Jersey. I bet Sherrill does well enough in North Jersey to win this primary. So the Republicans, for their part, are likely to run, I believe, Jack Ciattarelli. Again, we don't have a ton of information with this primary, but we do see a pretty clear advantage for Ciattarelli here, with Bill Spada or John Bramnick coming in a very distant second in every poll. Ciattarelli's done quite well in the county endorsements. Now, I think this is actually kind of an interesting primary because the Republicans do, I would say, have two above replacement level candidates in both Ciattarelli and John Bramnick. Ciattarelli was their nominee in 2021. As you can see, he actually did quite well. And this was before 2024, obviously. This is before, we had political attention on this state. Ciattarelli shocked the world by coming within, 3.2% of winning this race. This was just had a year prior voted for Biden by 15 or 16 points, and Ciattarelli got 48% of the vote. And this was a stunning result. I remember seeing, there was a time where Ciattarelli was leading on election night, and I remember seeing this and thinking, oh my goodness, is this going to happen? And it didn't happen. Phil Murphy held on, but this was a very, very exciting race. And Ciattarelli ran even though he didn't win, I thought he ran a brilliant campaign to come this close. So he clearly has been able to do this before, and New Jersey, if you compare 2020 to 2024, did get 10% redder. So it looks like opportunities knocking, so to speak, for Ciattarelli. But Republicans, I think, would also be fine running John Bramnick, who is less known statewide, but is certainly would be a strong candidate. I think, is more moderate than Ciattarelli, who himself is kind of a moderate, older school Republican. But Bramnick, is interesting because he's a state legislator, he's a lawyer, and he comes from a pretty blue part of New Jersey. He comes from a Biden-Harris House district, or state Senate district, and he won, these elections in 2021, and he won elections in the state house, or the lower house of New Jersey in the past, by winning over a lot of moderate Democrats in the suburbs who in recent years have still been hostile to the GOP. So I think Bramnick would also run a fine campaign, but I'm just going to based on the polling, as we can see, it's clear Ciattarelli's the favorite. So Ciattarelli versus Mikey Sherrill. How would that race go? Now, I do think it would be interesting, but the Republicans, even though 2024 was certainly a redder year in New Jersey, and I think New Jersey has a redder reputation it did in 2020, there are a few issues for Republicans here. The first issue is kind of a, I don't want to say a tautology, but it's kind of a circular logic moment, in the sense that even though the state did get redder, that can kind of work to the benefit of the Democrats, because unlike in 2021, they'll have an incentive to organize. They will be motivated. because even in 2021, before Kamala Harris did so poorly here last year, Democrats were pretty spooked by this performance. And it's a reminder that even though some states might be blue federally, in local elections, they are willing to go red. And so I think Democrats, especially Mikey Sherrill, know this. Um, the state party is, I don't want to guarantee that they'll be better than they've been in the past, but I do think there's a pretty clear reason to believe that they'll at least try harder or be more uh, organized in this election. And I think the state GOP's had a good past few years. There's no reason to believe they'll stop. But the state Democrats, the pressure's on them, and obviously bad things can happen, but you'd expect them to kind of try to meet the moment, which would benefit Mikey Sherrill. More importantly, though, the broad dynamic in these races, especially in off-year elections, is that turnout benefits the party that is out of power. And we saw this in 2009 when the Republicans with Chris Christie flipped this state red. We saw this in 2013 when Christie won a landslide victory for re-election. And we saw it in 2017 when the Democrats came back and won a 14-point victory in this governor's race with Phil Murphy for the first time. And the party out of power, in 2021, we saw it with the Republicans, where Chitterelli lost by just 3 points in a Biden plus 15 or Biden plus 16 state. So the party out of power has consistently overperformed here, and now the Democrats are back to being out of power. There's an expectation that'll return for them. The additional and the even more compelling reason to believe Democrats are likely to do well here is that the Democratic Party has a coalition of high propensity voters. They're doing better in the suburbs than they did 10 years ago. They're doing better among high turnout coalitions than they did 10 years ago. And they're doing better with older voters than they did 10 years ago. It's part of a trade-off, to be fair. They've lost support among working class voters. They've lost support in the cities, but those are lower turnout areas relative to the areas I listed prior. So those things make me think this is a Democratic leaning race. Certainly not a guarantee, but I'm comfortable starting out in the likely column. Now, there are a few issues for Democrats. First of all, even though I just explained how they've lost support in urban areas, they still need to go to urban turnout. Newark isn't voting Republican, so Democrats still certainly would need it. And if we see turnout falling, and if we see Democrats kind of having voter apathy problems, which was an issue for them in 2021, things could get dicey. And a lot of my, I don't want to say confidence, but like a lot of my lack of boldness here in predicting a Republican victory or predicting a particularly close race is that I do assume that the state Democratic Party is going to be a lot, less asleep at the wheel, because often we've seen this happen in, we saw this happen in Texas in the late 2010s. The state GOP, they lost a lot of ground. It went from an R plus 15 state to an R plus 5 state in the, basically within the snap of a finger, and then it stayed sturdy because the Republicans began to hold the line. Democrats hope that's happening in New Jersey. I think there's reason to think that'll happen, but it's also possible that the state Democratic Party is the problem, is trying, and isn't going to do well. So time will tell. Now let's move on a bit south to the Commonwealth, of Virginia. This is a race where we're lucky we don't have to talk about the primary because we know who the candidates are. Actually, for both these parties, neither of the candidates received a real challenge. The Republicans, their presumptive nominee has always been Winsome Sears. Democrats, their presumptive nominee has always been Abigail Spanberger. Now, these, I think, are both pretty strong candidates. Winsome Sears currently, as you can see, is the lieutenant governor of the state, so she did win a statewide election by around 2% in 2021. And Spanberger comes from the 7th District, and she is I'd say a pretty skilled politician. I mean, she's certainly someone who's been able to win competitive elections, and she did it in 2018, she did it in 2022, and she has a pretty solid electoral record. So I think, like I said, both strong candidates. I expect to see a strong campaign run from both the state GOP and the state Democrats. And this is kind of I don't want to say a heavyweight fight because this isn't a true 50-50 swing state, but I would say the Virginia Republicans really, ever since Glenn Youngkin, have had a very effective, I mean, maybe revival is a way to put it, because they had a good 2021. Obviously, actually, they had a perfect 2021, basically. They lost a bit of ground locally in 2023, but in 2024, Trump only lost the state by 5 points, and they held on to the 2nd district in the House, and they did okay in the 7th district. So all in all, good race. But let's just take a look at what we kind of have right now. So if we take a look at kind of this general election, we don't have a ton of polling, but from what we do have, it's clear that one party has an advantage. Of course, these polls, the latest is literally from 2 months ago, and it's from a Republican pollster, but they still do show Spanberger up by 6%. We also saw another poll from Roanoke, which is a local pollster, which, those of you who watch the channel know I like local pollsters. They have a ton of undecided voters, but they still see a pretty clear edge here for Spanberger. Coefficient, which is a GOP poll, had it a bit closer, but all in all, you can see that the polls do tilt towards Spanberger. I think in general, Virginia is interesting because there's a couple dynamics at play here. First of all, it's a state that's going to be affected by like the Doge cuts, right? And I'm not saying that as a negative. I'm not saying it as a positive. Obviously, I'm not here to tell you that I love Doge or that I don't like Doge. I'm just here to say, look, I think that the Democrats are going to make an issue out of this. They're going to say that Elon Musk, who they've kind of made into a boogeyman, like they did in Wisconsin, they're going to say, look, Elon Musk is firing government employees. He's doing these reckless cuts to our national infrastructure, and that could resonate. It could not resonate, but if there's a state where it's going to resonate, it's Virginia, where you have a ton of federal employees, especially in the Nova area and in the kind of Newport News, Virginia Beach area down here. So just in general, that's going to be a factor that Democrats are likely to lean on in this election. I also think that Abigail Spanberger as a candidate kind of lends herself to running the not traditional, but the more moderate, maybe not kitchen table issues, but like just generic, I'm a Democrat and I'm going to win on normal Democratic policy. So I don't really view her as being like a specific type of Democrat. She's not like a progressive. She's not like a populist, working class Midwestern Democrat. She's not like a super conservative Democrat. She's just, I'm going to run as a Democrat and I'm going to win on that. And I think the pros of that are that she's not super scandal-ridden. She's not going to alienate a ton of Democrats. But the cons of that are that she might be limited in the base that she was able to reach out to. That being said, Kamala Harris still won the state by a little more than 5%, I believe, last November. Like I talked about in New Jersey, the turnout dynamic helps Democrats here, especially given that they're now the party of high turnout. Locally, Virginia is weird. I was still pretty surprised when Glenn Youngkin won in 2021 because, again, this was just a year after Biden had won the state by like 10%. So the Republicans do well locally. I don't want to say it's trending right, but since 2020, it's kind of reverted back to this light blue state. After 2020, if you remember, there were conversations about Virginia being like a new deep blue, like a new New Jersey or a new Connecticut, where it's just like, typically in the mid-teens for Democrats, where it's a state they rely on to win decisively. Just to kind of remind you, in 2018, Tim Kaine won the Senate race here by like 17 points. Then Joe Biden won it by 10, and Mark Warner won by like 14. So 2020, 2018 was kind of the peak of Democrats here. They've lost support, but also the country's gotten more conservative since 2018 and 2020. So that might just be the pendulum swinging back and forth, and who knows? But that's a conversation for another time. That being said, I'm going to be cautious. I'm going to put this in the lean column. It's going to be close to likely it is to toss up, certainly. I don't think there's really any justification for this race being a toss up. But what I will say is that the Republicans of Virginia have given me confidence in the past 4 years. I would make the argument that Winsome Sears is a strong candidate. She's won statewide before. And even though that was in a redder year, it's likely that some of her support could still kind of make this a very competitive race. So I'm open to moving this in the likely Democratic column. I'm also open to moving this if we get more polling that's good for Republicans, maybe down to a tilt. But for now, lean feels like the place to be. So those are my current predictions. Let me know what you're thinking. Let me know what you'd like to see me cover next, and I'll talk to you all later.